Okay, we're going to get started. We're very happy to have this rather unique program. Just for the record, I always do this, but what the heck, I'm the chairman. Raise your hand if you're a graduate of Chicago Public Schools. All right, there you go. Okay, give all of us a hand. There you go. All right. This will be a somewhat unique, I'm sure, and please hold your applause on this. I will not be the moderator for this event. Hold your applause. I know many of you now are thrilled. So, let me introduce Linda Lenz, who will be the moderator and who put this panel together. She is the founder and publisher of Catalyst Chicago, a print and online news organization that covered the progress, problems, and politics. I'm surprised at third P, of school reform in Chicago. And, skipping along, before launching Catalyst in 1990, Lenz was the education writer for the Chicago Sun-Times. You might have heard about that newspaper lately. And before that, an editorial writer for the Chicago Daily News. Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Lenz, your moderator.
Thank you. Thank Jay for inviting Catalyst expertise. We're really pleased to lend it here. Thank Paul, I think, for letting me stand in his shoe steps for this particular panel, which was one of the most controversial subjects to come our way in a long time. First, if I may, I'd like a couple words about Catalyst. We are a nonprofit, independent, award-winning news magazine in print and online. If you'd like to get a free sample issue, you can put your business card in a box on the way out there. Our parent organization is the Community Renewal Society. It was founded in 1882 as an urban mission organization, and now it focuses on issues of race and poverty. Our sister publication is the Chicago Reporter. Next year, Catalyst celebrates its 25th anniversary, and we've planned a year-long series of events and activities under the banner of education, then, now, next. So please stay tuned for more information on that to come. Okay, the issue of the day, what has been known as the mass school closings. It's a big topic. We have a big panel, so we're going to have very short introductions and very short opening statements, panelists, right? Actually, why don't the panelists come on board here so we can be ready to roll. First, a couple of foundational facts, so we know where we're starting with. The school board voted in May of 2013 to close 49 elementary schools and one high school at the beginning of the next school year. Those schools enrolled about 12,000 students. The board designated 50 other schools as welcoming or receiving schools and invested heavily in capital improvements at those schools. It also made program upgrades, but there are differences of opinion as to how you characterize those, so I won't attempt to do that and let the panelists talk about that. In any event, only about 60% of the displaced students enrolled in those 50 schools. Some left the city, some left the system, many went to other schools. And this is one area where we are going to get some independent information about what happened. The Consortium on Chicago School Research, which is really one of the best assets this city has, is looking into the issue of how parents pick schools, which certainly can be enlightening, so we should be able to see some data on that in the future. Okay, now introductions alphabetically. Carlos Azcoitia is a former Chicago Public School principal, teacher, and administrator, and he's now a member of the Chicago Board of Education. Valerie Leonard, no, I'm doing it alphabetical order. Caref is a national board certified math teacher who is now the research director at the Chicago Teachers Union. Valerie Leonard is a community development consultant who convened the Lawndale Alliance of residents and organizations to tackle problems addressing North Lawndale. Tom Tyrrell is the Chief Operating Officer of the Chicago Public Schools, who headed up the district's transition team on school closings. Previously, he provided strategic development and operational management for other large public sector organizations. Andrea Zopp is a member of the Chicago Board of Education and has been president of the Chicago Urban League for 4 years. and before that, she held leadership executive positions with a number of large organizations. So let's get rolling. Start with Andrea, opening statement. What did the board hope to accomplish, and do you feel it's accomplishing it with the school closings?
So the board was faced with, we've got a situation of diminishing resources, our revenues are declining, and trying to figure out how to manage and run the system, and we were faced with some difficult issues. As the 2010 census showed, we lost hundreds of thousands of people from the city of Chicago. In terms of how that impacted Chicago public schools, we lost, there were more than 145,000 students under the age of 19 came out of the city in the last 10 years preceding the census. We had 500,000 seats, 400,000 students. So what does that mean? So when you're looking at, we had over 100 schools that were 50% utilized. So what that means is you walk into a school, you have half the number. You have a school that can house 600, 700 students. It has less than 300. If you've ever been in that kind of a school, I can just tell you that it's not a great use of your resources. Yes, you have lots of space, so you can do some things, but the fact is that you're stretching thin. We also had an issue where we were going to have to invest in some of our buildings. Many of the buildings that we have are older, and so the question is, are you going to invest in a building that you don't have students to put in the seats? And so what we were trying to do, the objective was to better utilize our resources. So if you can put all of your resources in one school, with a school that's filled, and then you can invest in that school, the goal was to end up with a better educational environment for these students. That was the goal, recognizing that that's what we had to do. Then the question is, and I mean, we were looking at, I don't know if people remember, but the original list of underutilized schools had 300 schools on it. I don't think we ever contemplated that we would close 300 schools, but the original list was 300. We created a couple of lists of priorities around what kinds of, how we would make these decisions. We eliminated high schools immediately, so all the high schools came up. We said we would not impact schools that were level 1, so our highest performing schools. And then there were a number of other things. We also appointed Dr. Barbara Bird-Bennett appointed a commission to take a look, to go around, talk to people, look at all the facts, and help us figure out how to pare down that 300 list. So we put a lot of effort into getting to the list, but the final list of schools. The other critical factor we had that there's been some criticism about was why do it all at one time? Why not take some schools and do it over time? This was whatever we did, whenever you close a school, whether it's 1, whether it's 50, whether it's 5, it's disruptive. And we knew we had to do a certain number that was needed to be big. So if you're going to do that over 5 years, you just have constant disruption. Nobody can focus. Everybody's worried, is my school going to be on the list next year? So the idea was to identify the schools, say we're going to do it, and say we're not going to do it for another 5 years, which is what we said. And yes, it was a big take. Our assessment is, and there's others on the panel who talk to it, and so I'll stop, but is that we executed well overall, and that when you hear the data overall, the kids in the new schools are doing very well. And we can talk, and we will talk when we get some questions more about what that looks like and what that means. But the primary objective was to get a better educational environment for as many of our kids as we could, given that we had lost hundreds of thousands of kids to the system.
Thank you for your short opening statement. Tom, Tyrrell, talk about the logistics.
Well, it was May when the board acted. We had to go to work immediately. So we had been in parallel planning mode since about December, not knowing which specific schools would be consolidated or even how many. We knew there would be one. And so we put together a detailed plan around the requirements to close one school into one school and figured out how we might scale that. And then as the dialogue went on and other alternatives became available, we had to look at other ways to put schools together. So the numbers that you see quoted about the 47 and 49 are interesting numbers and they're factual, but that's only about half of the schools that my team dealt with. We actually touched 128 schools, over 30,000 students. We did the relocations, the co-locations, one school consolidated into one school, multiple schools consolidated into one school consolidated into multiple schools, about 7 different types of consolidations. And then we ended up doing some, helping with some actions that were not necessarily part of the SB 630 requirement, but other things such as a turnaround, the turnaround schools and some others. So it was a 72-day race. We had one simple imperative. We wanted to make every child feel welcome in their new school. That was our job, and we felt like that if we could find a way to do that, that we would have successfully made a good first impression and had been able to successfully overcome the significant challenges that have been set before us. And that we'd heard about from the communities and from other experiences around the country. So that was our goal. We spent a ton of money trying to make the schools look better, make them look welcoming and inviting and fresh and bright. We put supports in place for the students, for the communities. We had detailed academic support plans for the schools that were vetted with the chief of schools in marathon sessions late into the night for every single welcoming school. We put a new safety plan, excuse me, a new safety plan in place that required our chief of security, J.D. Chow, to meet with every single welcoming school set of parents that desired to meet with her, some of them more than once, to make sure that we had the safe passage routes correct, or as good as we could get them. We rewrote the closing school manual, which is about 2 inches thick at this point. So it was nonstop. It was nonstop. There were, we moved over 3 million pounds of furniture in 72 days, 120,000 pieces of furniture were reallocated. We inventoried and repurposed over 1 million textbooks and other instructional materials, avoiding the cost of purchasing those items out of operating dollars going forward. So we had our work cut out for us. The team that we put together was a fabulous team. The most crucial element of the team, and I will say this up front, is that we have unbelievable teachers in our schools. We have incredibly dedicated administrators, and they were there, and they didn't ask for this, and they responded heroically in these schools to make this work for children.
Okay, thank you.
But the real adhesive that pulled it all together was a group of 110 retired principals who volunteered to step up and walked into those schools as the principal transition coordinator and said to the principal of the consolidated school and the welcoming school, "I'm here to help. What do you need for me to do?" And they really made the difference because they were eyes and ears on the ground that allowed us to have the information that we needed to make our bureaucracy support it the best that we could.
Okay, thank you. Caref, you and your team at the CTU did a report on school closing 12 months later. What did you find?
Thank you. And just by the way, there are copies of the report out on the table that you can grab when you leave. So 12,000 students started the school last year in new, unfamiliar places, without many of the vital programs they'd had before. Students from the closed Lafayette School had to leave behind their Boys and Girls Club, Henson students, their family health center. Some young students traveled more than a mile away from their home to get to new schools. No number of safe passage workers could make the emotional journey from a familiar, tight-knit school to a new, overcrowded one feel safe. Students who participated in this school closings experiment were not randomly selected. 90% were from majority African American schools. They were on average poorer than other CPS students. The median income in their neighborhoods was about $16,000 less than other Chicago neighborhoods. This is not a coincidence. If you attend school in a poor neighborhood, chances are good your school will not get the health services, social workers, and small class sizes it needs to be successful. Instead, CPS will open charters, which are supposed to be better schools, except that every study has shown that they're not. Then, when fewer students attend your under-resourced neighborhood school, it gets closed. So you have to go to a different under-resourced school. This needs to stop. Our students should not be moved around like pawns in a chess game. The claim that students would get a better education at their new schools didn't really pan out. The Catalyst headline said it all. CPS touts minute improvements for students from closed schools. What I want to know is, when are the people who run things in this city going to stop experimenting on children? When are the rich and powerful going to invest in affordable housing, jobs, safe environments, and the schools our children deserve, instead of closing health clinics and schools while giving tax breaks to billionaires? CPS experiments a lot on our students. Charters, school closings, turnarounds, budget reductions, segregated schools. Kind of reminds me of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, mostly done on African Americans, continued after proven unnecessary, real purpose not revealed to subjects, government and moneyed interests involved. These experiments are unnecessary because we know what works. Small class sizes, sufficient time for teacher collaboration and study, social supports for economically struggling students, integrated schools. Yes, education costs money, but Illinois has the least equitable school funding of any state in the country. Even with the amount of money we've got, students could have a much richer educational experience if money weren't wasted on closing and opening schools in the same neighborhood, on over-testing, unnecessarily complicated evaluation systems, and vendors like Aramark. CPS needs to do what works. Finally, teachers, parents, and students in this city are fighting for an elected representative school board precisely because the current school board supports experimental policies that hurt children, families, and communities. Ms. Zopp and Mr. Azcoitia, I would like to challenge you and the rest of the school board to stop supporting unproven experimental policies and instead help our students get the schools they deserve.
We will. Obviously, we'll discuss this more later. We'll go on to the next opening statement. Valerie, Leonard, how has your community changed as a result of the school closings?
It's not changed for the better. I can tell you that we personally, and when I say personally, I'm talking about folks in North Lawndale, we have not found CPS to be welcoming. We have not found them to be people that listen to us. And in fact, the bureaucracy, time and time again, has told us no. They've been more CPS, the agency of no. We shared with them an alternative plan. As soon as we found out schools were going to be closed, we in the community, and that includes some of our elected officials, it includes folks who run nonprofit organizations, we put our heads together, we put an alternative plan together, we submitted this to the Board of Education as well as to the CEO of CPS, got no response. We had another meeting to talk about the plan, a public meeting. We invited CPS to come, no response. We sent emails when the schools were closed to find out, well, what's going on with the budget? How in the world are we going to survive? What's going to happen with our schools? We sent 3 emails, the exact same email 3 times asking, and we got no result. We sent this FOIA asking the same questions. Guess what? No result. You're right, no result whatsoever. And we also had to do our own town hall meeting. Since we couldn't get the answers from CPS, we found the answers for most of the questions, except for how much all of this stuff really costs. But we found the answer for most of the questions on CPS's website and in other places. School closures have really accelerated privatization in North Lawndale. Of 25 schools, 2/3 of those schools are now privatized. We only have 1/3 of our schools being traditional schools. The other 2/3 are controlled by AUSL or they're charter schools. And the sad thing is this experiment hasn't worked. You know, they have not provided better alternatives. AUSL, in fact, has been the one who benefited the most in terms of what happened with school closures. When we look at the way the boundaries were drawn for Henson, the receiving school didn't get the lion's share of the schools. Herzl, which is an AUSL school, got more than 50% if you look at the way the boundaries were drawn. The receiving school only got 30% of the schools. When we look at the schools in and around Douglas Park, all of the schools are now either AUSL schools or charter schools. What kind of message does that send to the general public? We have no public schools in or around Douglas Park. And we really, really like the fact that Mayor Emanuel put together a committee that studied the repurposing of the schools. In fact, here's a copy of the plan. Beautiful report. Brilliant, brilliant. And we looked at it and we really liked it. And what we liked about it is it called for comprehensive planning that would involve people at the ground level, people who actually go to the schools, people who actually live in the community. But guess what? It's not being followed. This plan is not being followed. And it's such a shame. In fact, when they put the plan together, there were no African Americans from the West Side, even though the African American community on the West Side was ground zero for all the school closings. They didn't give us a representative on this committee until after the work was done. What kind of signal is that for the community? It tells the community you're not welcome, you're not intelligent, your remarks don't matter. You're telling our kids we don't matter. You're telling our teachers who live in the community and have been displaced that we don't matter. We sent comments. We got no response to our comments. We actually sent comments not only to CPS, we sent comments to the mayor's office. Guess what? No response. You know, it's not like we're just doing this work for our health, but we're really not getting any response. School closures have actually compounded segregation in North Lawndale. When we look at Paderewski School borders North Lawndale to the north, which is primarily African American, and Little Village to the south, which is primarily Latino. That was the only school that served 2 communities in North Lawndale. That school closed when they drew the boundaries. The boundaries were drawn such that the African Americans to the north of Cermak were relegated to schools that weren't performing as well as the closing schools. The kids to the south of Cermak got to go to a better performing school, and the African Americans who were in Paderewski refused to go to better performing schools because they were concerned about gang tension and racial tension. We brought this to the attention of CPS before they closed the schools, and guess what? They closed the school anyway, and we're much more segregated now than ever. Finally, when schools were closed, they told us, you know, we're gonna save money. Every school that's still standing is gonna be even more resourced than they were when they began. And we looked at the data over the past 2 years, and that has not proven to be true. For the past 3 years, we've been hearing the sky is falling. There's a $1 billion budget deficit. We've heard this for 3 years straight. Every year, we ended up with surpluses. This year, we're hearing, oh, $1 billion budget deficit. But guess what? If you look on the website, the budget balances. It's $500 million more than it was when schools were closed. And on top of that, they had the unmitigated gall to reduce budgets for neighborhood schools by over $200 million. $232 million they reduced.
Okay, Valerie, can you wrap?
Yes, I'll
Thank
wrap
you.
up.
Okay.
They also, I just have a couple more things to say. They also
Quickly.
increased the budget for charter schools by over $80 million. So clearly, we're not getting equity here. And spent over $363 million to close schools, and then had a budget of $8.9 million to move people around, and ended up spending $30 million. You know, who's minding the store? We need an elected school board that's going to be accountable to the people. Thank you.
Okay. Carlos?
Thank you.
Lessons learned?
Thank you. Let me preface my statements with these remarks. You know, education is about optimism and it's about idealism with a plan for action. We are seeing some improvements and you are seeing some results that are happening school-wide. We still have many challenges. But let me say that when you interrupt a sense of belonging and security, it becomes very stressful emotionally, especially when schools have served families for generations. So these are very challenging decisions, and my lens as I approach this major undertaking, my kids went to my neighborhood public school. How would I feel, you know, if suddenly my school is going to be closed? I was the principal of a community school where we had health services, where we had a variety of community services to assist our families. How would I feel if this school would be closed? But having said that, I have to approach this from a perspective of equity and opportunity, based on some resources and financial realities. How does this equity play a role here? Well, some of the principles of equitable schools have to be high academic growth for all learners with decreasing performance gaps. And we're seeing some results, and I always ask for a breakdown of data among all the schools that are consolidated and the schools that we closed. Full participation of all learners in all programs and activities. The alignment of equitable resources. Of course, the inclusion, because it's been part of my career, of parents and community in every decision. Because we want to establish an academic identity in our students that is developed with how students perceive their connection to education. And we are enhancing in other nearby neighborhood schools. But if I go to the lessons learned, I would have to say that school transition plans for welcoming schools, even though some schools that did that extensively, we can always do that better. So as you welcome parents and students and communities, everything is very detailed. We have principal transition coordinators, because some of the receiving schools principals had been there just a couple of years. That was very valuable. You want to prioritize safety, and we continue to do that. And of course, significant resources allocated to all of this. This is a major investment, and we begin to see, you know, some of the results of all of this, but we have to prepare early. Do we need more time? Yes, we need more time, but not necessarily breaking it down over the years. Now, as a board member, what do I want to achieve as being the former principal of a community school? I want equity and quality for all students, regardless where you are at. I want quality options. I want an accountability system that's applicable to all, between all the different school models that many times as board members, we listen to parents who are very connected to neighborhood schools, others are very connected to their charters, and we're all interested in the progress of all of our students. An accountability system that's based on growth, and it's based on multiple factors. We need a new approach as we approach school districts, because we have different models, and yet those different models many times don't come together to serve communities. So I want to make sure that deserving neighborhood schools and community schools also have the autonomy necessary, as well as other charter schools, what they have. And of course, we need more funding. Andrea and I just come from a meeting, and we know that we have a pension payment of over $700 million. We know we have limited resources. We have to make these difficult decisions, and I represent this equity and quality for all of our students because of my background, my whole career in the Chicago Public Schools. Thank you.
We have a question from the audience right away.
Let's make sure our people come on in. Raise your hand if you have a question. They'll pick it up.
Oh, boy, you have to write legibly. What was the alternative to closing schools based on the money available? I understand this to be, am I supposed to say you asked the question? It's Paul. No, it's Paul Gorn, I just noticed. Sorry, Paul. Okay, what I understood this to be is, could you have saved that money someplace else?
You want the
No.
short answer? I think the short answer is no. I mean, I don't think we went, we have so many options available to us, let's close 50 schools or disrupt thousands of students. So I think our view was, given the resources we had, it was the most efficient way to create some savings. I cannot also overestimate that we also believed, and I think the data has begun to prove, but will prove over time, that we wanted to create better educational environments for the students who were impacted. I didn't go to all of the schools we closed, but I went to a lot of them, and they were not very good schools. In fact, many of them were horrible places that, frankly, as a member of the board, I'm embarrassed to say that we had kids in. One school went in, all of the empty rooms were full of furniture. It looked like an episode of Hoarders. Think about that for an environment to send your kids to. So the objective was to help get our kids into a better environment where we could focus resources. And so, yes, we wanted to save money, we needed to save money, we're going to save money. But we were also looking at a way to better use the resources and the assets that we have to drive better educational outcomes. And we believe that we've accomplished that, and we're going to continue to accomplish that.
Okay, some of these are about situations at individual schools which may show how things did not universally go well, but I don't know if
Linda, I'm sorry, I don't know the procedure. Is more
Yeah,
than
you're
one
right.
person allowed to answer the question?
Pardon me?
Can I also
yes.
answer that question?
Go right ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay, no problem. I just wasn't sure what the procedure was. So it's an interesting question because although CPS talks a lot about saving money, we don't know a lot about how much was spent on closing schools. So, and there have been a lot of attempts to, by the Chicago Education Facilities Task Force and others to try to get these numbers, but we don't have those numbers. We do know that CPS spent at least $285 million on costs related to school closings. We don't know how much was spent on things like CPS central office staff, time and resources devoted to this process. Excuse me. In terms of the money issue that's being raised here is really a red herring, as is the issue of the quality of education in these schools prior to the closings. We're not saying everything was hunky-dory in these schools. We're saying that these schools needed resources, and those resources weren't being provided, and closing schools did not help. It didn't. 85% of the students went from what CPS calls a level 3 school to another level 3 school. So and the school they went to was very overcrowded, and there were a lot of other problems in those schools. So this is not a way to save money. There are many other ways not only to save money, but to get money. It's interesting that whenever the issue of where to get more money is talked about, all we hear from CPS is steal it from the teachers' pensions that they've worked all their lives from. Thank you. What about millionaires paying their fair share? What about corporations paying their fair share? What about financial transaction tax? There are a lot of different ideas that CTU and other community groups have come up with in terms of ways to have more money for schools, but none of these are considered by CPS. Oh, fine, come up with your own idea, but you can't just talk about money in terms of cut. We also have to talk about what we're going to do to get money to properly fund our children's education.
Anybody, you want to weigh in, Carlos?
Yes. You know, I was a neighborhood school principal for 10 years in the community of Little Village. So there's a limit many times with limited resources, the length of time that you can wait. We are seeing some important gains that are happening in our schools, in attendance, in grades, on track to graduation, fewer incidents of misconduct as a result of other strategies that we're using. So these limited resources, we have to make them to use. Students cannot waste their time. We have to make some decisions. And you're talking from a neighborhood school perspective, because this is where I have been throughout life. And I know that we need to balance different models because you need options in different communities. But we're seeing positive results.
So can I just say two things? So first of all, there's a couple of factual inaccuracies that I need to correct. 85% of students did not go to worse schools than that they were in, or even equal, number one. Number two, none of the students were put into overcrowded school situations. So let me say that one more time. Zero of the students were put into overcrowded schools. So that's just factually inaccurate. So if we're going to talk, I can have a discussion, but it's not fair for me to have to refute inaccurate facts. So that's not accurate. The other piece on the school funding, here's where our revenue comes from. Our revenue comes from the state and from property taxes. And if you look at the revenue line, those revenues are declining. So we can say, yes, millionaires should pay more, or we should get the banks to pay more. I can't make that happen. CPS cannot make that happen. So right now, I have to look at the money I have right now to run the schools now. You're absolutely right. Those schools needed more resources. That would be great. We don't have them to put into those schools. And so what we did was take those schools and do what any other organization, well-run organization would do, and try and more efficiently use those resources and put those students together so that we could more effectively use the limited dollars that we have. So it's great to say there's more pool. I haven't seen one actual suggestion of where that money would come from that's actually real, that's going to happen, that we could actually go to and get. CPS. Not some another new model. You got another model? That's great. As a matter of fact, there is a new bill right now in the state to change how we fund education that will hopefully lead to more equitable funding of education and eventually more resources. But the main thing that has to happen is that the state needs to contribute more dollars to education, and that's not going to happen until the state fixes its budget.
Okay, can I say something?
Very briefly?
Okay, very
'cause
briefly.
I have a
All right,
stack of questions.
Okay, first of all, we had overcrowding at Sumner School in the pre-K program.
No more questions, we have enough questions the last night.
Okay, and then just an observation in terms of school funding. I'm really concerned that our mayor spent more time last year, during the school closings, lobbying to get schools closed than he did for funding, and now they're complaining about lack of funding. There's something wrong with that picture.
That's also not factually accurate. The mayor, as well as others, have spent a fair amount of time lobbying on school funding. So I can't tell you how much he spent on one topic versus the other, but the suggestion that the mayor, the board, and other organizations are not working and lobbying to get increased funding is, again, factually inaccurate.
Linda, I'm sorry, I just have a process question. Do you want, Ms. Zopp has opinions, obviously I have opinions, other people on the panel have opinions. Because I could answer some of the things she says, but I'm holding back
Yeah.
because I thought that wasn't the process. Could you
Well,
explain that?
The thing is, I'd like to move on to some of the other questions that people had
Thank
to
you.
ask. Okay, so I heard something on both sides of that issue, so at least it's not just one side. Move on to what is the utilization plan for the current closed buildings that are being looted from our, and are a blight to our communities? Editorial question there as well. What's the utilization plan?
Again, we are actually following the repurposing plan, and so we have, it's a three-step plan that the committee put together. I was on the committee. The first part was very easy. We identified some schools that made sense to immediately repurpose for the use of CPS. The second part, which we are in now, is to offer the properties up for sale, and they have to meet two tests. The first test is that we have to follow the school code, which is fairly restricted in our ability to sell property. The second test is that the property has to be reutilized in a way that conforms with the community preference. The community preference has been established thus far by aldermen. The aldermen have been uniquely within their wards and within their neighborhoods approaching this a little bit differently, but most of them involve a meeting or a series of meetings, either with the community at large or with leadership of community organizations from different parts of the ward that are around the school property. They will communicate to us what their preference is, and we will put that into the bid solicitation. So that's the second phase. Yesterday, the board approved the very first sale of property, which was Peabody, and it conforms with what the community desires in that there will be a community use, there will be an educational program in the actual Peabody School building, and there will be a low-density residential structures on the same footprint. So they're allowed to do that. It gives them a return on the investment. It uplifts the community, and it provides resources that are needed in that community with respect to, in this case, early childhood programs. So we will follow that pattern throughout. As the aldermen continue to give us their preferences, we will put properties out for solicitation, follow the code, follow the community preference. The last phase, which will be the hardest phase, is the redevelopment phase, and we will take the properties that are remaining that no one is interested in buying, and we will try to attract a third-party redevelopment partner that we can creatively put together financing that would still be able to allow that building to exist and support the community preference. And we're hopeful that the buildings that don't sell for whatever reason, we'll still get a number of those buildings that will be available to continue to support the community. It's not lost on anyone the emotional and real value of these buildings to these communities as assets. They represent a heritage and a legacy for many of the neighbors and the families. We get that. And that's why we're doing everything that we can to take that closed school building, put it to new use, give it a new life in a way that the community supports. And at the same time, we have to accomplish our initial goal or task of taking that expense and that property off the books so that we can continue to realize the savings that we projected in the school closing.
Linda, if I may
Comments?
add, I envision as a board member that some of these sites could be community service centers where we could target different services, either connected to city government, to a university, and we're able to support communities. Not in all of them, but this is something that we need. I think with Peabody, we already have indications of that with the Northwestern Settlement House to be able to offer those services so we can make those adjustments and serve community members, families, and residents.
Although actually many of the schools that were closed did have community services in their building, and I don't understand why we didn't just try to expand those before all these schools were closed instead of now scrambling to find people.
No, with
to put in
limited
the schools.
resources and having been the principal of a community school, that was my first question. So those services that were there went to the nearby neighborhood schools where the students were going. So that was a question I always asked, being a community school principal. Thank you.
Okay, there are several questions about charter schools and why is the board opening charter schools while it's closing other schools? Somebody want to discuss that?
So there's a couple reasons. The first is some of the schools that are opening were approved before we decided to close schools. Some of the schools that were approved are in neighborhoods in which we actually have a need for seats. So one of the things to think about is that while we do have a loss of overall students across the district, we still have a number of neighborhoods in which we do have growing student populations and very overcrowded schools. But we did approve a few and a very few charter schools in neighborhoods nearby closed schools. Those proposals were quality proposals, and we wanted to create choice for parents in those neighborhoods. However, here's what I would say from my position, and this is just me on the board, that is a completely legitimate question. We don't need any more schools. It really seats, that would be the point. And we have got to develop a strategy about how we're going to manage choice in the district. And that includes charters and contract schools and our neighborhood schools. And we have not articulated that. And so you are completely right to question us. We have not been strategic about it, and we need to be. And so I wholly agree with that. We cannot continue to open new seats and then say, well, we close schools because we have too many seats. It is highly hypocritical. We cannot continue to do it, and I will continue to fight. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have more new charters, but it means we need to be thoughtful and strategic about what schools and where, and make sure that they're also performing charters, because many of our charters are not performing. That is something we need to be focused on, and we will be.
This is not, though, just about charters that were opened after the schools were closed. When you get a chance to look at our report, you'll see this map, and you can't probably tell from there, but on the map it shows that the same neighborhoods where schools were closed, there are a whole lot of charter schools that had been opened in those neighborhoods. And so what we're saying is that CPS caused this crisis of underutilization because schools were built in neighborhoods that didn't have populations to support them. So there were too many schools in certain neighborhoods, and now for CPS to say, oops, sorry, we'll try not to do that again, it's just not acceptable. I'm sorry.
You know, I just want to add,
Yeah. Back up.
my role in the board is to create this balance and this equity among all school models. We find options in some communities that are necessary. But I've also been connected to community schools throughout my professional career here, where I started teaching. So this sense of balance and equity is my priority. And we know that we've put charters also on a watch list if they are not performing. We have closed two. But we need quality neighborhood schools among a quality option for our residents. And I'm all for that on the board.
So, and just so we're clear, just to create another factual inaccuracy, the census showed that 200,000 people left the city of Chicago. So CPS did not create the loss of people from the city.
But only
So
30,000 students, that's the number we're looking at, not how many people left
100
Chicago, how many students.
Carol, let's let Andrea finish.
145,000 less students. in the system, not in, and that includes charter schools. So, just so we're clear, it is, you're absolutely right, there are some issues that have to balance it, but the idea that CPS created the issue is just, again, not correct. So, again, if we can just talk about accurate facts, and then we can have a discussion.
Move to another topic. Can you explain why so many of the schools were in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods? And then said, that, well, I'll leave it there.
Because that's where the under-resourced schools were. And that's because that's where the schools were empty, because that's where the loss of the population was. So it's not like we went and said, and by the way, just so we're clear, the overwhelming majority of our schools are filled with children of color. So that's just the practical reality. But the fact is, when you're starting a model that says we're going to look at schools that are underutilized, that's going to be predominantly schools of children of color. That's just the way that it is, because that's where the schools we were. But by the way, so this would be the other fact, the thing that just, makes me nuts. People complain about the fact that we closed those schools. Nobody came to me and complained about the fact that we were operating these horrific buildings of education before we closed these schools. Not one person. So the fact is, we had swaths of neighborhoods where there was no high-performing school, no school of performing school for people in those neighborhoods, predominantly neighborhoods filled with black and brown children. Nobody came to me and complained about that. I complained about it. It bothers me, and we need to fix it, and we're on a path to fixing that. That's offensive. That is offensive, and that's what we need to fix, and that's what we're on the path to fix, so that every parent, wherever they live, has the right to look for and have a school that will educate their kids. We are not doing that, and we need to get to a place to do that. That's what this school closing effort was about.
And I want to support all schools, but I want to support neighborhood schools, and I want to honor them to achieve the autonomy that other school models have once they make the progress that we want them to make for all communities.
And underutilized schools were not just in black and brown neighborhoods. I happened to have been at a board meeting, and folks from Lincoln Park were complaining about having a school with a new addition. They were saying that they didn't need it, and then they also referenced another school that was underutilized. So let's be clear, the way you actually apply the policy for underutilized schools, you happen to target the black schools, and schools that were not in poor black neighborhoods got a pass.
No, because those schools were also high-performing schools, which is the point I just raised to you. The issue was not only that they're underutilized, but the schools in black and brown neighborhoods were not performing, and
But
we
you said
tolerated
performance
that.
wasn't an issue. It was supposed to be utilization. Now we get to performance.
I told you when I started that schools that were performing came off the list. I said that. So if the school was a level 1 school, it wasn't on the list. The schools that you're just talking about in Lincoln Park are level 1 schools. But the question, however, should be, that should offend us. Why are the schools in Lincoln Park working and the schools in Inglewood are not? That's a problem that we have to fix.
So it's true that there are that what you said about being fewer African American students in the city, but that's because of another city policy, of course, which was tearing down and destroying public housing. And it's another example of taking something that's a problem, and instead of fixing the problem, just tearing it down. So instead of fixing the problem of under-resourced schools, and by the way, CTU members and other community organizations have absolutely complained about lack of resources in these schools.
Okay.
It's just not true to say that you, if you hadn't heard about it, you weren't listening, because we have been talking about that for years, and we have been demanding that something be done about it. But what historically, as I said, has CPS done? So the city done. The projects are torn down. Then yes, there are fewer people to go to
Okay.
schools in certain neighborhoods, But instead of saying, okay, well, let's look at the schools we've got and let's see what we can do for those schools in those same neighborhoods where you know there are fewer students, a bunch of charter schools are built.
Okay, I think we're starting to repeat a little bit. I'm going to move on to
Okay.
another question, and I'm
Okay.
told I have only 2 left. There's a question about how the board reacted to the Educational Student Facilities Fund report on overcrowding. And one of them is that the CPS Board of Education supposedly ignored the recommendations of the independent commission on some of the closings, where the independent commission suggested that the school be closed, and the board went ahead and closed it. Is there anyone who can speak to that?
I don't have
I
a
don't-
specific memory of
Yeah.
that report or the recommendation, so
No,
I can't.
it's in the deliberations that were taking place as an observer, we did follow the independent commission recommendations, to my recollection, everything that they'd asked for, that we did make some changes. We also made a number of changes based on community meetings. We don't get a lot of credit for that. And then the CEO made changes right up to board day about what she was going to recommend. So we were actually listening a lot more closely than is widely accepted.
There were at least 11, I forget the exact number, but at least 11 hearing officers who, after they had the hearings, recommended that the school not be closed, and all of those schools were closed anyway. So I think that's what the question is about.
Okay.
Well,
It's a
what we have to understand is that resources went to the nearest neighborhood school. We had to do some consolidations, and we can question all the financial issues. But that's reality. That's where the resources were. And that's what I question. And every time I go around, I want to make sure we break down the data and we see how those students are benefiting.
Okay, there are several questions here about individual schools, which frankly, I'm not sure how to handle, because I don't know if anybody in the panel will know about what's happening in individual schools. One is at Jane Hoff, at Kellogg School, there are efforts to garner a higher percentage of tax funding. Oh, no, let me try this again. Are there efforts to garner a higher percentage of tax funding from higher income districts in the state to share with lower income areas? I mean, there's an attempt to, I can briefly answer it too.
There is a
Go ahead.
bill currently in the state legislature, SB 16, that is an effort to change the way we allocate the resource dollars that we put into the state pool for education funding. That would change that allocation from just property taxes to one based on need, based on a formula. So if that's what they're referencing, there is a bill in the legislature to do that. There's a number of groups supporting that, including the Urban League, and that may be what they're referencing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now as I started to say, I got my questions mixed up here. There's an issue at Robert Hughes School about fewer kids being enrolled. There is a question about Kellogg School.
It's next
Yeah.
to impossible for me to
Yeah, I know.
answer an
I understand that.
individual school question without being able to go back and look at it, so.
Yeah. So my
We're always
apologies to the
searching
people
for
who
data and
answered
taking
those
a look at
questions.
all of that.
And I think we're wrapping up. I get a high sign. As you can see, well, welcome to the Chicago Public Schools. Highly contentious, very interrelated, big issues that are difficult to solve. And thank the panelists for agreeing to come.